If we factor the left side, the numbers are -8 and -8. So we have x minus 8 times x minus 8 equals 100. My computer loves to screw with me for some reason. And because x minus 8 and x minus 8 are identical, we would put x minus 8 squared equals 100. Now we can solve this equation using square roots. We would take the square root of each side. What do we have to put in when we put a square root in? A plus or minus. So x minus 8 equals positive or negative. What is the square root of 100? 10. Is my answer done? What do I need to do? Add 8 to both sides. This will be x equals 8 plus or minus 10. Is my answer done? Not quite, because 8 and 10 are both actual real numbers that you can add together. So 8 plus 10 is 18. 8 minus 10 is -2. Your solutions are 18 and -2. What they're trying to do with this example is show you that if the left side looks like this, it factors into x minus 8 squared. This thing is called a perfect square trinomial. A perfect square trinomial has a number times 2 as the middle number, and that same number squared as the third number. So -8 times 2 is -16. -8 squared is 64. On the next page, it shows you what a perfect square trinomial looks like. For example, if I have something like x plus 3 squared, this is called a binomial squared. So if your assignment asks you to write something as a binomial squared, binomial means 2 terms. That 2-termed thing is squared. The shortcut for multiplying out a binomial squared is to follow this perfect square trinomial. Perfect square trinomial means 3 terms, and it came from a perfect square. X plus 3 squared is going to be a perfect square. This pattern says take the first thing, in our case it's x, and square it. The middle term you get from multiplying those two things together, x and 3, and then multiplying it by 2. So x times 3 is 3x. 3x times 2 is 6x. And then this last thing is the second number, 3 squared, which is 9. This is a perfect square trinomial. And really, they want you to see the connection between the positive 3, the 6, and the 9. So I'm going to write in here, this 6 is our 3 times 2, and the 9 is our 3 squared. Okay. In examples 5 through 8, they want to know what value of c would make each of these trinomials be a perfect square trinomial. To figure this out, you basically need to start with your middle number. What is 14 divided by 2? 7. And I'm going to circle that 7. Just hang on to that 7 in your head. This c value is going to be that 7 squared. What is 7 squared? 49. So your c value is 49. Your assignment is then going to also ask you to write the expression as a binomial squared. Basically, that means if this c was really 49, what would that expression look like if you factored it? And the key is that 7 that I circled. So the factored form would be x plus 7 squared. So on your assignment, you'll need to do both of these things. Figure out what c is, and then write it as a binomial squared. Okay, let's try number 6. To figure out what c is, what is negative 8 divided by 2? Sorry, not negative 8. What is 8 divided by 2? 4, and I'm going to circle that 4. 4 squared is 16. So c would be 16. Now, write this as a binomial squared. If you were to factor this trinomial, it would factor into x plus 4 squared. Number 7 is honestly the most challenging because anytime you're dealing with 1 or negative 1, it's confusing in our brains. So follow the same steps we did before. Take your middle number, negative 2. What is negative 2 divided by 2? Negative 1. And I'm going to circle that negative 1. Your c value is going to be that negative 1 squared. What is negative 1 times negative 1? 1. So our c value is 1. Now, how did we get that c value? We squared negative 1. The key is negative 1. So the factored form is x minus 1 squared. Our c value was 1. And our factored form, the binomial squared, is x minus 1 squared. I want you to try 8 on your own. First, figure out what does c need to be, then write it in factored form. All right, to figure out what c needs to be, you start with your middle number, negative 10. Half of negative 10, or negative 10 divided by 2, is negative 5. Negative 5 is the key. To figure out what c is, you need to take negative 5 and square it. Negative 5 squared is positive 25. So your c value is positive 25. Now, if I gave you the trinomial x squared minus 10x plus 25 and asked you to factor it, you would end up with negative 5 and negative 5, so your factored form would be x minus 5 squared. The shortcut is negative 5 is the key to both of those numbers. Negative 5 times 2 is negative 10. Negative 5 squared is positive 25. So negative 5 is what goes in that binomial squared. Okay, now you've learned how to complete the square. Finding that c value is completing the square. It's completing the perfect square trinomial. Let's use that skill to solve some equations. So here's the deal. I'm going to give you number 9, and I'm going to say you have to factor the left side. Your life depends on it. If you can't factor that left side, you're going to die. This is really deep. Sorry if you're watching the video and freaked out right now. I'm not actually going to kill you, I promise. Because I would never do that. I'm a very nice person. I don't like harming people. So, you'd think, all right, I have to factor this thing. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 7, and those same numbers add up to negative 10. The only way to multiply to get 7 is 1 times 7. I can't make negative 10 from that. This won't factor. What am I going to do? So, this doesn't work. The 7 is problematic. So I'm going to make the 7 go away. But in an equation, you can't really make things go away in an equation. The only thing you can do is move it to the other side by subtracting 7 on both sides. And notice I put some blanks in there. This kind of makes it look like the previous examples. We're trying to figure out what could we stick in there to complete the square so that we could factor it. So, just like we did above, half of negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. Negative 5 squared is positive 25. Now here's the catch. You can't just add something to one side of an equation. If you add 25 to the left side, you also have to add 25 to the right side. As long as you add the same thing to both sides of the equation, this equation is still valid. Now that we've added 25, we've completed the square. The left side can now be factored into x minus 5 squared. On the right side, negative 7 plus 25 is 18. Do you know how to solve that equation? Yes, we can square root both sides. So see, everybody's safe. Nobody has to die. So x minus 5 equals positive or negative. We may need to go off to the side somewhere and simplify the square root of 18. How can we break up the square root of 18? 9 and 2. The square root of 9 is 3. So x minus 5 equals plus or minus 3 times the square root of 2. Am I done? No? Add 5 to both sides. X equals 5 plus or minus 3 times the square root of 2. So we need to figure out what we need to add to both sides to complete the square. So take your middle number 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. 16 is what we are going to add to both sides. Because that 16 came from squaring 4, the factored form is x plus 4 squared, and on the right side we have 21. To finish solving this, we are going to square both sides, or square root both sides. Don't forget your plus minus. So x plus 4 equals positive or negative. Can we simplify the square root of 21? I don't think so. So our final answer is negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 21. If I asked you to factor x squared minus 4x plus 11, there's no pair of numbers that multiplies to give you 11 while at the same time adding up to negative 4. So that 11 is problematic. Subtract 11 on both sides. Seriously, computer, if you keep unzooming like that, I am going to throw you against a wall. How about I just write small? So we've got x squared minus 4x blank. We're subtracting 11 on both sides. 3 minus 11 is negative 8. Now, we want to figure out what do we need to add on both sides to complete the square. So, half of negative 4. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is positive 4. We're going to add 4 on both sides. So what is the factored form? X minus 2 squared. And the right side is negative 4. How do we solve this equation? Square root both sides. We need to take the square root of negative 4 and simplify it. How do you break up the square root of negative 4? Square root of negative 1, square root of 4. Anytime you see a negative, start by splitting it up into the negative and the positive. The square root of negative 1 is I. The square root of 4 is 2. So plus or minus 2i.